Chapter 107, The Lion's Den, one division of law force, in which the most dangerous and desperate prisoners are confined, is called the Court of St. Bernard. The prisoners, in their expressive language, have named it the Lion's Den, probably because the captives possess teeth which frequently gnaw the bars, and sometimes the keepers also. It is a prison within a prison. The walls are double the thickness of the rest. The gratings are every day carefully examined by jailers, whose Herculean proportions and cold, pitiless expression prove them to have been chosen to reign over their subjects for their superior activity and intelligence. The courtyard of this quarter is enclosed by enormous walls, over which the sun glances obliquely when it deigns to penetrate into this gulf of moral and physical deformity. On this paved yard I'd be seen, pacing to and fro from morning till night, pale, careworn, and haggard, like so many shadows, the men whom justice holds beneath the steel she is sharpening. There, crouched against the side of the wall which attracts and retains the most heat, they may be seen sometimes talking to one another, but more frequently alone, watching the door, which sometimes opens to call forth one from the gloomy assemblage, or throw in another outcast from society. The Court of St. Bernard has its own particular apartment for the reception of guests. It is a long rectangle, divided by two upright gratings placed at a distance of 3 feet from one another to prevent a visitor from shaking hands with or passing anything to the prisoners. It is a wretched, damp, nay, even horrible spot, more especially when we consider the agonizing conferences which have taken place between those iron bars. And yet, frightful though this spot may be, it is looked upon as a kind of paradise by the men whose days are numbered. It is so rare for them to leave the Lion's Den for any other place than the Barrier St. Jacques, the galleys, or solitary confinement. In the court which we have attempted to describe, and from which a damp vapor was rising, a young man with his hands in his pockets, who had excited much curiosity among the inhabitants of the den, might be seen walking. The cut of his clothes would have made him pass for an elegant man, if those clothes had not been torn to shreds. Still they did not show signs of wear, and the fine cloth, beneath the careful hands of the prisoner, soon recovered its gloss in the parts which were still perfect, for the wearer tried his best to make it assume the appearance of a new coat. He bestowed the same attention upon the cambric front of his shirt, which had considerably changed in color since his entrance into the prison, and he polished his varnished boots with the corner of a handkerchief embroidered with initials surmounted by a coronet. Some of the inmates of the Lion's Den were watching the operations of the prisoner's toilet with considerable interest. "See, the prince is pluming himself," said one of the thieves. "He's a fine-looking fellow," said another. "If he had only a comb and hair grease, he'd take the shine off the gentleman in white kids. His coat looks nearly new, and his boots are brilliant. It is pleasant to have such well-dressed brethren, and those gendarmes behaved shamefully. What jealousy, to tear such clothes." "He looks like a big bug," said another. "Dresses in fine style. And then to be here so young. Oh, what larks!" Meanwhile, the object of this hideous admiration approached the wicket, against which one of the keepers was leaning. "Come, sir," he said, "lend me 20 francs. You will soon be paid. You run no risks with me. Remember, I have relations who possess more millions than you have deniers. Come, I beseech you, lend me 20 francs so that I may buy a dressing gown. It is intolerable always to be in a coat and boots. And what a coat, sir, for a prince of Cavalcanti." The keeper turned his back and shrugged his shoulders. He did not even laugh at what would have caused anyone else to do so. He had heard so many utter the same things. Indeed, he heard nothing else. "Come," said Andrea, "you are a man void of compassion. I'll have you turned out." This made the keeper turn around, and he burst into a loud laugh. The prisoners then approached and formed a circle. "I tell you that with that wretched sum," continued Andrea, "I could obtain a coat, and a room in which to receive the illustrious visitor I am daily expecting." Of course," said the prisoners. "Anyone can see he's a gentleman." "Well, then, lend him the 20 francs, said the keeper, leaning on the other's shoulder. "Surely you will not refuse a comrade." "I am no comrade of these people," said the young man proudly. "You have no right to insult me thus." The thieves looked at one another with low murmurs, and a storm gathered over the head of the aristocratic prisoner, raised less by his own words than by the manner of the keeper. The latter, sure of quelling the tempest when the wave became too violent, allowed them to rise to a certain pitch that he might be revenged on the importunate Andrea, and besides would afford him some recreation during the long day. The thieves had already approached Andrea, some screaming, "La Savet! La Savet!" A cruel operation, which consists in cuffing a comrade who may have fallen into disgrace, not with an old shoe, but with an iron-heeled one. Others propose the angle, another kind of recreation, in which a handkerchief is filled with sand, pebbles, and 2-sou pieces, when they have them, which the wretches beat like a flail over the head and shoulders of the unhappy sufferer. "Let us horsewhip the fine gentleman," said others. But Andrea, turning towards him, winked his eyes, rolled his tongue around his cheeks, and smacked his lips in a manner equivalent to 100 words among the bandits when forced to be silent. It was a Masonic sign Catullus had taught him. He was immediately recognized as one of them. The handkerchief was thrown down, and the iron-heeled shoe replaced on the foot of the wretch to whom it belonged. Some voices were heard to say that the gentleman was right, that he intended to be civil in his way, and that they would set the example of liberty of conscience, and the mob retired. The keeper was so stupefied at this scene that he took Andrea by the hands and began examining his person, attributing the sudden submission of the inmates of the lion's den to something more substantial than mere fascination. Andrea made no resistance, although he protested against it. Suddenly a voice was heard at the wicket. "Benedetto!" exclaimed the inspector. The keeper relaxed his hold. "I am called," said Andrea. "To the visitor's room," said the same voice. "You see, someone pays me a visit." "Ah! My dear sir, you will see whether Cavalcanti is to be treated like a common person." And Andrea, gliding to the court like a black shadow, rushed out through the wicket, leaving his comrades, and even the keeper, lost in wonder. Certainly a call to the visitor's room had scarcely astonished Andrea less than themselves, for the wily youth, instead of making use of his privilege of waiting to be claimed on his entry into La Force, had maintained a rigid silence. "Everything," he said, "proves me to be under protection of some powerful person. This sudden fortune, the facility with which I have overcome all obstacles, an unexpected family, and an illustrious name awarded to me, gold showered down upon me, and the most splendid alliances about to be entered into. An unhappy lapse of fortune and the absence of my protector have cast me down, certainly, but not forever. The hand which has retreated for a while will be again stretched forth to save me at the very moment when I shall think myself sinking into the abyss. Why should I risk an imprudent step? It might alienate my protector. He has 2 means of extricating me from this dilemma, the one by a mysterious escape, managed through bribery, the other by buying off my judges with gold. I will say and do nothing until I am convinced that he has quite abandoned me, and then—" Andrea had formed a plan which was tolerably clever. The unfortunate youth was intrepid in the attack and rude in the defense. He had borne with the public prison and with privations of all sorts. Still, by degrees nature, or rather custom, had prevailed, and he suffered from being naked, dirty, and hungry. It was at this moment of discomfort that the inspector's voice called him to the visiting room. Andrea felt his heart leap with joy. It was too soon for a visit from the examining magistrate, and too late for one from the director of the prison or the doctor. It must, then, be the visitor he hoped for. Behind the grating of the room into which Andrea had been led, he saw, while his eyes dilated with surprise, the dark and intelligent face of Bertuccio, who was also gazing with sad astonishment upon the iron bars, the bolted doors, and the shadow which moved behind the other grating. "Ah!" said Andrea, deeply affected. "Good morning, Benedetto," said Bertuccio, with his deep, hollow voice. You, said the young man, looking fearfully around him. "Do you not recognize me, unhappy child?" "Silence! Be silent!" said Andrea, who knew the delicate sense of hearing possessed by the walls. "For heaven's sake, do not speak so loud." "You wish to speak with me alone, do you not?" said Bertuccio. "Oh, yes. That is well." And Bertuccio, feeling in his pocket, signed to a keeper whom he saw through the window of the wicket. "Read," he said. "What is that?" asked Andrea. "An order to conduct you to a room, and to leave you there to talk to me." "Oh!" cried Andrea, leaping with joy. Then he mentally added, "Still my unknown protector, I am not forgotten. They wish for secrecy, since we are to converse in a private room. I understand. Bertuccio has been sent by my protector. The keeper spoke for a moment with an official, then opened the iron gates and conducted Andrea to a room on the first floor. The room was whitewashed, as is a custom in prisons, but it looked quite brilliant to a prisoner, though a stove, a bed, a chair, and a table formed the whole of its sumptuous furniture. Bertuccio sat down upon the chair. Andrea threw himself upon the bed. The keeper retired. "Now," said the steward, "what have you to tell me?" "And you," said Andrea. "You speak first." "Oh, no. You must have much to tell me, since you have come to seek me." "Well, be it so. You have continued your course of villainy. You have robbed. You have assassinated. Well, I should say, if you had me taken to a private room only to tell me this, you might have saved yourself the trouble. I know all these things, but there are some with which, on the contrary, I am not acquainted. Let us talk of those, if you please. Who sent you? Come, come, you're going on quickly, and Benedetto? Yes, and to the point. Let us dispense with useless words. Who sends you? No one. How did you know I was in prison? I recognize you, some time since, as the insolent dandy who so gracefully mounted his horse in the Champs-Élysées. Oh, the Champs-Élysées? Ah, yes. We burn, as they say at the game of Pincette. The Champs-Élysées? Come, let us talk a little about my father. Who, then, am I? You, sir. You are my adopted father. But it was not you, I presume, who placed at my disposal 100,000 francs, which I spent in 4 or 5 months. It was not you who manufactured an Italian gentleman for my father. It was not you who introduced me into the world, and had me invited to a certain dinner at Auteuil, which I fancy I am eating at this moment, in company with the most distinguished people in Paris. Amongst the rest was a certain procurer, whose acquaintance I did very wrong not to cultivate, for he would have been very useful to me just now. It was not you, in fact, who bailed me for 1 or 2 millions, when the fatal discovery of my little secret took place. Come, speak, my worthy Corsican, speak. What do you wish me to say? I will help you. You were speaking of the Champs-Élysées just now, worthy foster father. Well, in the Champs-Élysées there resides a very rich gentleman, at whose house you robbed and murdered, did you not? I believe I did. The Count of Monte Cristo? 'Tis you who have named him, as M. Racine says. Well, am I to rush into his arms and strain him to my heart, crying, my father, like Monsieur Pixacourt? Do not let us jest, gravely replied Bertuccio, and dare not to utter that name again as you have pronounced it. Bah, said Andrea, a little overcome by the solemnity of Bertuccio's manner. Why not? Because the person who bears is too highly favored by heaven to be the father of such a wretch as you. Oh, these are fine words, and there will be fine doings if you do not take care. Menaces, I do not fear them. I will say, do you think you are engaged with a pygmy like yourself? Said Bertuccio, in so calm a tone and with so steadfast a look that Andrea was moved to the very soul. Do you think you have to do with galley slaves or novices in the world? Benedetto, you are fallen into terrible hands. They are ready open for you. Make use of them. Do not play with a thunderbolt they have laid aside for a moment, but which they can take up again instantly, if you attempt to intercept their movements. My father, I will know who my father is, said the obstinate youth. I will perish if I must, but I will know it. What does scandal signify to me? What possessions, what reputation, what pull, as Beecham says, have I? You great people always lose something by scandal, notwithstanding your millions. Come, who is my father? I came to tell you. Ah, cried Benedetto, his eyes sparkling with joy. Just then the door opened, and the jailer, addressing himself to Bertuccio, said, Excuse me, sir, but the examining magistrate is waiting for the prisoner. And so closes our interview, said Andrea to the worthy steward. I wish the troublesome fellow were at the devil. I will return tomorrow, said Bertuccio. Good. Gendarmes, I am at your service. Ah, sir, do leave a few crowns for me at the gate that I may have some things I am in need of. It shall be done, replied Bertuccio. Andrea extended his hand. Bertuccio kept his own in his pocket and merely jingled a few pieces of money. That's what I mean, said Andrea, endeavoring to smile, quite overcome by the strange tranquility of Bertuccio. "Can I be deceived?" he murmured, as he stepped into the oblong and grated vehicle which they call the salad basket. "Never mind, we shall see. Tomorrow, then," he added, turning toward Bertuccio. "Tomorrow," replied the steward. Chapter 108. The Judge. We remember that the Abbé Busoni remained alone with Noirtier in the chamber of death, and that the old man and the priest were the sole guardians of a young girl's body. Perhaps it was the Christian exhortations of the Abbé, perhaps his kind charity, perhaps his persuasive words, which had restored the courage of Noirtier. For ever since he had conversed with the priest, his violent despair had yielded to a calm resignation which surprised all who knew his excessive affection for Valentine. M. de Villefort had not seen his father since the morning of the death. The whole establishment had been changed. Another valet was engaged for himself, a new servant for Noirtier. 2 women had entered Madame de Villefort's service. In fact, everywhere, to the concierge and coachman, new faces were presented to the different masters of the house, thus widening the division which had always existed between the members of the same family. The assizes, also, were about to begin, and Villefort, shut up in his room, exerted himself with feverish anxiety in drawing up the case against the murderer of Catullus. This affair, like all those in which the Count of Monte Cristo had interfered, caused a great sensation in Paris. The proofs were certainly not convincing, since they rested upon a few words written by an escaped galley slave on his deathbed, and who might have been actuated by hatred or revenge in accusing his companion. But the mind of the procureur was made up. He felt assured that Benedetto was guilty, and he hoped by his skill in conducting this aggravated case to flatter his self-love, which was about the only vulnerable point left in his frozen heart. The case was therefore prepared owing to the incessant labor of Villefort, who wished it to be the first on the list in the coming assizes. He had been obliged to seclude himself more than ever, to evade the enormous number of applications presented to him for the purpose of obtaining tickets of admission to the court on the day of trial. And then so short a time had elapsed since the death of poor Valentine, and the gloom which overshadowed the house was so recent, that no one wondered to see the father so absorbed in his professional duties, which were the only means he had of dissipating his grief. Once only had Villefort seen his father. It was the day after that upon which Bertuccio had paid his second visit to Benedetto, when the latter was to learn his father's name. The magistrate, harassed and fatigued, had descended to the garden of his house, and in a gloomy mood, similar to that in which Tarquin lopped off the tallest poppies, he began knocking off with his cane the long and dying branches of the rose trees, which, placed along the avenue, seemed like the specters of the brilliant flowers which had bloomed in the past season. More than once he had reached that part of the garden where the famous boarded gate stood overlooking the deserted enclosure, always returning by the same path, to begin his walk again, at the same pace and with the same gesture, when he accidentally turned his eyes toward the house, whence he heard the noisy play of his son, who had returned from school to spend the Sunday and Monday with his mother. While doing so, he observed M. Noirtier at one of the open windows, where the old man had been placed that he might enjoy the last rays of the sun, which yet yielded some heat, and was now shining upon the dying flowers and red leaves of the creeper, which twined around the balcony. The eye of the old man was riveted upon a spot which Villefort could scarcely distinguish. His glance was so full of hate, of ferocity, and savage impatience, that Villefort turned out of the path he had been pursuing, to see upon what person this dark look was directed. Then he saw beneath a thick clump of linden trees, which were nearly divested of foliage, Madame de Villefort, sitting with a book in her hand, the perusal which she frequently interrupted to smile upon her son, or to throw back his elastic ball, which he obstinately threw from the drawing-room into the garden. Villefort became pale. He understood the old man's meaning. Noirtier continued to look at the same object, but suddenly his glance was transferred from the wife to the husband, and Villefort himself had to submit to the searching investigation of eyes, which, while changing their direction and even their language, had lost none of their menacing expression. Madame de Villefort, unconscious of the passions that exhausted their fire over her head, at that moment held her son's ball, and was making signs to him to reclaim it with a kiss. Edward begged for a long while, the maternal kiss probably not offering sufficient recompense for the trouble he must take to obtain it. However, at length he decided, leaped out of the window into a cluster of heliotropes and daisies, and ran to his mother, his forehead streaming with perspiration. Madame de Villefort wiped his forehead, pressed her lips upon it, and sent him back with the ball in one hand and some bonbons in the other. Villefort, drawn by an irresistible attraction, like that of the bird to the serpent, walked towards a house. As he approached it, Nordier's gaze followed him, and his eyes appeared of such a fiery brightness that Villefort felt them pierce to the depths of his heart. In that earnest look might be read a deep reproach, as well as a terrible menace. Then Noirtier raised his eyes to heaven, as though to remind his son of a forgotten oath. "It is well, sir," replied Villefort from below. "It is well. Have patience but one day longer. What I have said I will do." Noirtier seemed to be calmed by these words, and turned his eyes with indifference to the other side. Villefort violently unbuttoned his greatcoat, which seemed to strangle him, and passing his livid hand across his forehead, entered his study. The night was cold and still. The family had all retired to rest but Villefort, who alone remained up and worked till 5 o'clock in the morning, reviewing the last interrogatories made the night before by the examining magistrates, compiling the depositions of the witnesses, and putting the finishing stroke to the deed of accusation, which was one of the most energetic and best conceived of any he had yet delivered. The next day, Monday, was the first sitting of the assizes. The morning dawned dull and gloomy, and Villefort saw the dim gray light shine upon the lines he had traced in red ink. The magistrate had slept for a short time while the lamp sent forth its final struggles. Its flickerings awoke him, and he found his fingers as damp and purple as though they had been dipped in blood. He opened the window. A bright yellow streak crossed the sky and seemed to divide in half the poplars, which stood out in black relief on the horizon. In the clover fields beyond the chestnut trees, a lark was mounting up to heaven, while pouring out her clear morning song. The damps of the dew bathed the head of Villefort, and refreshed his memory. "Today," he said with an effort, "today the man who holds the blade of justice must strike wherever there is guilt." Involuntarily his eyes wandered toward the window of Nordier's room, where he had seen him the preceding night. The curtain was drawn, and yet the image of his father was so vivid to his mind that he addressed the closed window as though it had been open, and as if through the opening he beheld the menacing old man. "Yes," he murmured, "yes, be satisfied." His head dropped upon his chest, and in this position he paced his study. Then he threw himself, dressed as he was, upon a sofa, less to sleep than to rest his limbs, cramped with cold and study. By degrees everyone awoke. Villefort, from his study, heard the successive noises which accompany the life of a house, the opening and shutting of doors, the ringing of Madame de Villefort's bell, to summon the waiting maid, mingle with the first shouts of the child, who rose full of the enjoyment of his age. Villefort also rang. His new valet brought him the papers, and with them a cup of chocolate. "What are you bringing me?" said he. "A cup of chocolate." "I did not ask for it. Who has paid me this attention?" "My mistress, sir. She said you are to speak a great deal in the murder case, and that you should take something to keep up your strength." And the valet placed a cup on the table nearest to the sofa, which was, like all the rest, covered with papers. The valet then left the room. Villefort looked for an instant with a gloomy expression. Then, suddenly, taking it up in a nervous motion, he swallowed its contents at one draught. It might have been thought that he hoped the beverage would be mortal, and that he sought for death to deliver him from a duty which he would rather die than fulfill. He then rose and paced his room with a smile it would have been terrible to witness. The chocolate was inoffensive, for M. de Villefort felt no effects. The breakfast hour arrived, but M. de Villefort was not at table. The valet re-entered. "Madame de Villefort wishes to remind you, sir," he said, "that 11 o'clock is just struck, and that the trial commences at 12. "Well," said Villefort, "what then?" "Madame de Villefort is dressed. She is quite ready, and wishes to know if she is to accompany you, sir." "Where to?" "To the Palais." "What to do?" "My mistress wishes much to be present at the trial." "Ah," said Villefort, with a startling accent. "Does she wish that?" The servant drew back and said, "If you wish to go alone, sir, I will go and tell my mistress." Villefort remained silent for a moment, and dented his pale cheeks with his nails. "Tell your mistress," he at length answered, "that I wish to speak to her, and I beg she will wait for me in her own room." "Yes, sir." "Then come to dress and shave me." "Directly, sir." The valet reappeared almost instantly, and, having shaved his master, assisted him to dress entirely in black. When he had finished, he said, My mistress said she should expect you, sir, as soon as you have finished dressing. I am going to her. And Villefort, with his papers under his arm and hat in hand, directed his steps toward the apartment of his wife. At the door, he paused for a moment to wipe his damp, pale brow. He then entered the room. Madame de Villefort was sitting on an ottoman and impatiently turning over the leaves of some newspapers and pamphlets which young Edward, by way of amusing himself, was tearing to pieces before his mother could finish reading them. She was dressed to go out. Her bonnet was placed beside her on a chair, and her gloves were on her hands. "Ah, here you are, monsieur," she said in her naturally calm voice. "But how pale you are! Have you been working all night? Why did you not come down to breakfast? Well, will you take me, or shall I take Edward?" Madame de Villefort had multiplied her questions in order to gain one answer, but to all her inquiries de Villefort remained mute and cold as a statue. "Edward," said Villefort, fixing an imperious glance on the child, "go and play in the drawing-room, my dear. I wish to speak to your mamma." Madame de Villefort shuddered at the sight of that cold countenance, that resolute tone, and the awfully strange preliminaries. Edward raised his head, looked at his mother, and then, finding that she did not confirm the order, began cutting off the heads of his leaden soldiers. "Edward!" cried de Villefort, so harshly that the child started up on the floor. "Do you hear me? Go!" The child, unaccustomed to such treatment, arose, pale and trembling. It would be difficult to say whether his emotion were caused by fear or passion. His father went up to him, took him in his arms, and kissed his forehead. "Go," he said. "Go, my child." Edward ran out. De Villefort went to the door, which he closed behind the child and bolted. "Dear me," said the young woman, endeavoring to read her husband's inmost thoughts, while a smile passed over her countenance, which froze the impassibility of Villefort. "What is the matter?" "Madam, where do you keep the poison you generally use?" said the magistrate, without any introduction, placing himself between his wife and the door. Madame de Villefort must have experienced something of the sensation of a bird which, looking up, sees the murderous trap closing over its head. A hoarse, broken tone, which was neither a cry nor a sigh, escaped from her, while she became deadly pale. "Monsieur," she said, I do not understand you." And, in her first paroxysm of terror, she had raised herself from the sofa. In the next, stronger very likely than the other, she fell down again on the cushions. "I asked you," continued Villefort, in a perfectly calm tone, "will you conceal the poison by the aid of which you have killed my father-in-law, M. de Saint Méran, my mother-in-law, Madame de Saint Méran Barois, and my daughter Valentine?" "Ah, sir," exclaimed Madame de Villefort, clasping her hands, "what do you say? It is not for you to interrogate, but to answer." "Is it to the judge or to the husband?" stammered Madame de Villefort. To the judge, madam." It was terrible to behold the frightful pallor of that woman, the anguish of her look, the trembling of her whole frame. "Ah, sir," she muttered. "Ah, sir, and this was all." "You do not answer, madam," exclaimed the terrible interrogator. Then he added, with a smile yet more terrible than his anger, "It is true, then you do not deny it?" She moved forward. "And you cannot deny it," added Villefort, extending his hand toward her, as though to seize her in the name of justice. "You have accomplished these different crimes with impudent address, but which could only deceive those whose affections for you blinded them. Since the death of Madame de Saint Méran, I have known that a poisoner lived in my house. M. D'Avrigny warned me of it. After the death of Barois, my suspicions were directed toward an angel, those suspicions which, even when there is no crime, are always alive in my heart. But after the death of Valentine, there has been no doubt in my mind, madam, and not only in mine, but in those of others. Thus your crime, known by two persons, suspected by many, will soon become public. And as I told you just now, you no longer speak to husband, but to the judge." The young woman hid her face in her hands. "Oh, sir," she stammered, "I beseech you, do not believe appearances." "Are you then a coward?" cried Villefort, in a contemptuous voice. "But I have always observed that poisoners were cowards. Can you be a coward, you, who have had the courage to witness the death of two old men and a young girl murdered by you? Sir, can you be a coward? Continued Villefort, with increasing excitement. You, who could count, one by one, the minutes of death agonies? You, who have arranged your infernal plans, and removed the beverages with a talent and precision almost miraculous? Have you, then, who have calculated everything with such nicety, have you forgotten to calculate one thing? I mean where the revelation of your crimes will lead you to? Oh, it is impossible. You must have saved some surer, more subtle and deadly poison than any other, that you might escape the punishment that you deserve. You have done this. I hope so, at least. Madame de Villefort stretched out her hands and fell on her knees. I understand, he said. You confess. But a confession made to the judges, a confession made at the last moment, extorted when a crime cannot be denied, diminishes not the punishment inflicted on the guilty. The punishment? Exclaimed Madame de Villefort. The punishment, monsieur. Twice you have pronounced that word. Certainly. Did you hope to escape it because you were 4 times guilty? Did you think the punishment would be withheld because you're the wife of him who pronounces it? No, madam, no. The scaffold awaits the poisoner, whoever she may be, unless, as I just said, the poisoner has taken precaution of keeping for herself a few drops of her deadliest poison. Madame de Villefort uttered a wild cry, and a hideous and uncontrollable terror spread over her distorted features. Oh, do not fear the scaffold, madam, said the magistrate. I will not dishonor you, since that would be dishonor to myself. No, if you have heard me distinctly, you will understand that you are not to die on the scaffold. No, I do not understand. What do you mean? Stammered the unhappy woman, completely overwhelmed. I mean that the wife of first magistrate in the capital shall not, by her infamy, soil an unblemished name, that she shall not, with one blow, dishonor her husband and her child. No, no, oh no. Well, madam, it will be a laudable action on your part, and I will thank you for it. You will thank me for what? For what you have just said. What did I say? Oh, my brain whirls. I no longer understand anything. Oh, my God, my God. And she rose, with her hair disheveled and her lips foaming. Have you answered the question I put to you on entering the room? Where you keep the poison you generally use, madam? Madame de Villefort raised her arms to heaven and convulsively struck one hand against the other. No, no, she vociferated. No, you cannot wish that. What I do not wish, madam, is that you should perish on the scaffold. Do you understand? Asked Villefort. Oh, mercy, mercy, monsieur. What I require is that justice be done. I am on the earth to punish, madam, he added, with a flaming glance. Any other woman, were it the queen herself, I would send to the executioner. But to you I shall be merciful. To you I will say, have you not, madam, put aside some of the surest, deadliest, most speedy poison? Oh, pardon me, sir, let me live. She is cowardly, said Villefort. Reflect that I am your wife. You are a poisoner. In the name of heaven. No. In the name of the love you once bore me. No, no. In the name of our child. Ah, for the sake of our child, let me live. No, 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 I tell you, one day, if I allow you to live, you will perhaps kill him, as you have the others. I kill my boy, cried the distracted mother, rushing toward Villefort. I kill my son? Ha! 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 And a frightful, demoniac laugh finished the sentence, which was lost in a hoarse rattle. Madame de Villefort fell at her husband's feet. He approached her. Think of it, madam, he said. If, on my return, justice has not been satisfied, I will denounce you with my own mouth and arrest you with my own hands. She listened, panting, overwhelmed, crushed. Her eye alone lived and glared horribly. Do you understand me? He said. I am going down there to pronounce the sentence of death against a murderer. If I find you alive on my return, you shall sleep tonight in the conciergerie. Madame de Villefort sighed. Her nerves gave way, and she sunk on the carpet. The king's attorney seemed to experience a sensation of pity. He looked upon her less severely, and bowing to her, said slowly, Farewell, madam, farewell. That farewell struck Madame de Villefort like the executioner's knife. She fainted. The procureur went out, after having double-locked the door. Chapter 109. The Assizes The Benedetto affair, as it was called at the Palais and by people in general, had produced a tremendous sensation. Frequenting the Café de Paris, the Boulevard de Gand, and the Bois de Boulogne, during his brief career of splendor, the false Cavalcante had formed a host of acquaintances. The papers had related his various adventures, both as the man of fashion and the galley slave, and as everyone who had been personally acquainted with Prince Andrea Cavalcanti experienced a lively curiosity in his fate. They all determined to spare no trouble in endeavoring to witness the trial of M. Benedetto for the murder of his comrade in chains. In the eyes of many, Benedetto appeared, if not a victim to, at least an instance of, the fallibility of the law. M. Cavalcanti, his father, had been seen in Paris, and it was expected that he would reappear to claim the illustrious outcast. Many also, who were not aware of the circumstances attending his withdrawal from Paris, were struck with the worthy appearance, the gentlemanly bearing, and the knowledge of the world displayed by the old patrician, who certainly played the nobleman very well, so long as he said nothing and made no arithmetical calculations. As for the accused himself, many remembered him as being so amiable, so handsome, and so liberal, that they chose to think him the victim of some conspiracy, since in this world large fortunes frequently excite the malevolence and jealousy of some unknown enemy. Everyone, therefore, ran to the court, some to witness the sight, others to comment upon it. From 7 o'clock in the morning, a crowd was stationed at the iron gates, and an hour before the trial commenced the hall was full of the privileged. Before the entrance of the magistrates, and indeed frequently afterwards, a court of justice, on days when some especial trial is to take place, resembles a drawing room where many persons recognize each other and converse if they can do so without losing their seats, or, if they are separated by too great a number of lawyers, communicate by signs. It was one of the magnificent autumn days which make amends for a short summer. The clouds which into Villefort had perceived at sunrise had all disappeared as if by magic, and one of the softest and most brilliant days of September shone forth in all its splendor. Beauchamp, one of the kings of the press, and therefore claiming the right of a throne everywhere, was eyeing everybody through his monocle. He perceived Château and Debray, who had just gained the good graces of a sergeant-at-arms, and who persuaded the latter to let them stand before, instead of behind him, as they ought to have done. The worthy sergeant had recognized the minister's secretary and the millionaire, and by way of paying extra attention to his noble neighbors, promised to keep their places while they paid a visit to Beauchamp. "Well," said Beauchamp, "we shall see our friend." "Yes, indeed," replied Debray. "That worthy prince. Deuce take those Italian princes. A man, too, who could boast of Dante for a genealogist, and could reckon back to the Divina Commedia. A nobility of a rope," said Château phlegmatically. "He will be condemned, will he not?" asked Debray of Beauchamp. "My dear fellow, I think we should ask you that question. You know such news much better than we do. Did you see the president at the minister's last night?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "Something which will surprise you." "Oh, make haste and tell me, then. It is a long time since that has happened." "Well, he told me that Benedetto, who is considered a serpent of subtlety and a giant of cunning, is really but a very commonplace, silly rascal, and altogether unworthy of the experiments that will be made on his phrenological organs after his death." "Bah!" said Beauchamp. "He played the prince very well." "Yes, for you detest those unhappy princes, Beauchamp, and are always delighted to find fault with them, but not for me, who discover a gentleman by instinct, and who sent out an aristocratic family, like a very bloodhound of heraldry." "Then you never believed in the principality?" "Yes, in the principality, but not in the prince." "Not so bad," said Beauchamp. "Still, I assure you, he passed very well with many people. I saw him at the ministers' houses." "Ah, yes," said Château. "The idea of thinking ministers understand anything about princes." "There is something in what you have just said," said Beauchamp, laughing. "But," said Debray to Beauchamp, "if I spoke to the president, you must have been with the procureur. It was an impossibility, for the last week-end of Villefort has secluded himself. It is natural enough. The strange chain of domestic afflictions, followed by the no less strange death of his daughter." "Strange? What do you mean, Beauchamp?" "Oh, yes. Do you pretend that all this has been unobserved at the minister's?" said Beauchamp, placing his eyeglass in his eye, where he tried to make it remain. "My dear sir," said Château. "Allow me to tell you that you do not understand that maneuver with the eyeglass half so well as Debray. Give him a lesson, Debray." "Stay," said Beauchamp. "Surely I am not deceived. What is it?" "It is she." "Whom do you mean?" They said she had left. "Mademoiselle Eugénie?" said Château. "Has she returned?" "No, but her mother." "Madame Danglars?" "Nonsense." "Impossible," said Château. "Only 10 days after the flight of her daughter, and 3 days from the bankruptcy of her husband?" Debray colored slightly, and followed with his eyes the direction of Beauchamp's glance. "Come," he said, "it is only a veiled lady, some foreign princess, perhaps the mother Cavalcanti. But you were just speaking on a very interesting topic, Beauchamp." "I?" "Yes. You were telling us about the extraordinary death of Valentine." "Ah, yes, so I was. But how is it that Madame de Villefort is not here?" "Poor, dear woman," said Debray. "She is no doubt occupied in distilling balm for the hospitals, or making cosmetics for herself or friends. Do you know she spends 2,000 or 3,000 crowns a year in this amusement? But I wonder she is not here. I should have been pleased to see her, for I like her very much." "And I hate her," said Château. "Why?" "I do not know. Why do we love? Why do we hate? I detest her from antipathy, or rather by instinct." "Perhaps so. But to return to what you were saying, Beauchamp. Well, do you know why they die so multitudinously at M. de Villefort's?" "Multitudinously is good," said Château. "My good fellow, you'll find a word in Saint Simon. But the thing itself is at M. de Villefort's. But let's get back to the subject." "Talking of that," said Debray, "Madame was making inquiries about that house, which for the last 3 months has been hung with black." "Who is Madame?" asked Château. "The minister's wife, pardieu." "Oh, your pardon. I never visit ministers. I leave that to princes. Really, you were only before sparkling, but now you are brilliant. Take compassion on us, or, like Jupiter, you will wither us up." "I will not speak again," said Château. "Pray have compassion upon me, and do not take up every word I say. Come, let us endeavor to get to the end of our story, Beauchamp. I told you that yesterday Madame made inquiries of me upon the subject. Enlighten me, and I will then communicate my information to her." "Well, gentlemen, the reason people die so multitudinously, I like the word, and in the Villeforts, is that there is an assassin in the house." The 2 young men shuddered, for the same idea had more than once occurred to them. "And who is the assassin?" they asked together. "Young Edward." A burst of laughter from the auditors did not in the least disconcert the speaker, who continued, "Yes, gentlemen, Edward, the infant phenomenon, who is quite an adept in the art of killing." "You are jesting." "Not at all. I yesterday engaged a servant, who had just left him to Villefort. I intend sending him away tomorrow, for he eats so enormously, to make up for the fast imposed upon him by his terror in that house." "Well, now listen." "We are listening." "It appears the dear child has obtained possession of a bottle containing some drug, which he every now and then uses against those who have displeased him. First, M. and Madame de Saint Méran incurred his displeasure, so he poured out 3 drops of his elixir. 3 drops were sufficient. Then followed Barrois, the old servant of M. Noirtier, who sometimes rebuffed this little wretch. He therefore received the same quantity of the elixir. The same happened to Valentine, of whom he was jealous. He gave her the same dose as the others, and all was over for her as well as the rest." "Why, what nonsense are you telling us?" said Château. "Yes, it is an extraordinary story," said Beauchamp. "Is it not?" "It is absurd," said Debray. "Ah," said Beauchamp, "you doubt me? Well, you can ask my servant, or rather him who will no longer be my servant tomorrow. It was the talk of the house." "And this elixir, where is it? What is it?" "The child conceals it." "But where did he find it?" "In his mother's laboratory." "Does his mother, then, keep poisons in her laboratory?" "How can I tell? You are questioning me like a king's attorney." "I only repeat what I have been told, and like my informant I can do no more. The poor devil would eat nothing from fear." "It is incredible." "No, my dear fellow, it is not at all incredible. You saw the child pass through the Rue Richelieu last year. who amused himself with killing his brothers and sisters by sticking pins in their ears while they slept. The generation who follow us are very precocious. Come, Beauchamp, said Château. I will bet anything you do not believe a word of all you have been telling us. But I do not see the Count of Monte Cristo here. He is worn out, said Debray. Besides, he could not well appear in public, since he has been the dupe of the Cavalcante, who, it appears, presented themselves to him with false letters of credit and cheated him out of 100,000 francs upon the hypothesis of this principality. By the way, de Château asked Beauchamp, how is Moreau? Ma foi, I called 3 times without once seeing him. Still, his sister did not seem uneasy, and told me that though she had not seen him for 2 or 3 days, she was sure he was well. Ah, now I think of it, the Count of Monte Cristo cannot appear in the hall, said Beauchamp. Why not? Because he is an actor in the drama. Has he assassinated anyone then? No. On the contrary, they wished to assassinate him. You know that it was in leaving his house that M. de Cateris was murdered by his friend Benedetto. You know that the famous waistcoat was found in his house, containing the letter which stopped the signature of the marriage contract. Do you see the waistcoat? There it is, all blood-stained on the desk, as a testimony of the crime. Ah, very good. Hush, gentlemen. Here is the court. Let us go back to our places. A noise was heard in the hall. The sergeant called his 2 patrons with an energetic hem, and the doorkeeper appearing, called out with that shrill voice peculiar to his order ever since the days of Beaumarchais. The court, gentlemen. Chapter 110. The indictment. The judges took their places in the midst of the most profound silence. The jury took their seats. M. de Villefort, the object of unusual attention, and we had almost said of general admiration, sat in the armchair and cast a tranquil glance around him. Everyone looked with astonishment on that grave and severe face, whose calm expression personal griefs had been unable to disturb, and the aspect of a man who was a stranger to all human emotions excited something very like terror. Gendarmes, said the president, lead in the accused. At these words, the public attention became more intense, and all eyes were turned towards the door through which Benedetto was to enter. The door soon opened, and the accused appeared. The same impression was experienced by all present, and no one was deceived by the expression of his countenance. His features bore no sign of that deep emotion which stops the beating of the heart and blanches the cheek. His hands, gracefully placed, one upon his hat, the other in the opening of his white waistcoat, were not at all tremulous. His eye was calm and even brilliant. Scarcely had he entered the hall when he glanced at the whole body of magistrates and assistants. His eye rested longer on the president, and still more so on the king's attorney. By the side of Andrea was stationed the lawyer who was to conduct his defense, and who had been appointed by the court, for Andrea disdained to pay any attention to those details to which he appeared to attach no importance. The lawyer was a young man with light hair whose face expressed 100 times more emotion than that which characterized the prisoner. The president called for the indictment, revised, as we know, by the clever and implacable pen of Villefort. During the reading of this, which was long, the public attention was continually drawn towards Andrea, who bore the inspection with Spartan unconcern. Villefort had never been so concise and eloquent. The crime was depicted in the most vivid colors. The former life of the prisoner, his transformation, a review of his life from the earliest period, were set forth with all the talent that a knowledge of human life could furnish to a mind like that of the procurer. Benedetto was thus forever condemned in public opinion before the sentence of the law could be pronounced. Andrea paid no attention to the successive charges which were brought against him. M. de Villefort, who examined him attentively, and who no doubt practiced upon him all the psychological studies he was accustomed to use, in vain endeavored to make him lower his eyes, notwithstanding the depth and profundity of his gaze. At length the reading of the indictment was ended. "Accused," said the president. "Your name and surname?" Andrea arose. "Excuse me, Mr. President," he said in a clear voice, "but I see you are going to adopt a course of questions through which I cannot follow you. I have an idea, which I will explain by and by, of making an exception to the usual form of accusation. Allow me, then, if you please, to answer in different order, or I will not do so at all." The astonished president looked at the jury, who in turn looked at Villefort. The whole assembly manifested great surprise, but Andrea appeared quite unmoved. "Your age," said the president. "Will you answer that question?" "I will answer that question, as well as the rest, Mr. President, but in its turn." "Your age," repeated the president. "I am 21 years old, or rather, I shall be in a few days, as I was born the night of the 27th of September, 1817. M. de Villefort, who was busy taking down some notes, raised his head at the mention of this date. "Where were you born?" continued the president. "At Auteuil, near Paris." M. de Villefort a second time raised his head, looked at Benedetto as if he had been gazing at the head of Medusa, and became livid. As for Benedetto, he gracefully wiped his lips with a fine cambric pocket handkerchief. "Your profession?" "First I was a forger," answered Andrea, as calmly as possible. "Then I became a thief, and lately have become an assassin." A murmur, or rather storm, of indignation burst from all parts of the assembly. The judges themselves appeared to be stupefied, and the jury manifested tokens of disgust for a cynicism so unexpected in a man of fashion. M. de Villefort pressed his hand upon his brow, which at first pale had become red and burning. Then he suddenly arose and looked around as though he had lost his senses. He wanted air. "Are you looking for anything, Mr. Procureur?" asked Benedetto, with his most ingratiating smile. M. de Villefort answered nothing, but sat, or rather threw himself down again upon his chair. "And now, prisoner, will you consent to tell your name?" said the president. "The brutal affectation with which you have enumerated and classified your crimes calls for a severe reprimand on the part of court, both in the name of morality and for the respect due to humanity. You appear to consider this a point of honor, and it may be for this reason that you have delayed acknowledging your name. You wished it to be preceded by all these titles. It is quite wonderful, Mr. President, how entirely you have read my thoughts," said Benedetto, in his softest voice and most polite manner. "This is, indeed, the reason why I beg you all to the order of the questions." The public astonishment had reached its height. There was no longer any deceit or bravado in the manner of the accused. The audience felt that a startling revelation was to follow this ominous prelude. "Well," said the president, "your name?" "I cannot tell you my name, since I do not know it, but I know my father's and can tell it to you." A painful giddiness overwhelmed Villefort. Great drops of acrid sweat fell from his face upon the papers which he held in his convulsed hand. "Repeat your father's name," said the president. Not a whisper, not a breath, was heard in that vast assembly. Everyone waited anxiously. "My father is King's attorney," replied Andrea calmly. "King's attorney?" said the president, stupefied, and without noticing the agitation which spread over the face of M. de Villefort. "King's attorney?" "Yes, and if you wish to know his name, I will tell it. He is named Villefort." The explosion, which had been so long restrained from a feeling of respect to the court of justice, now burst forth like thunder from the breasts of all present. The court itself did not seek to restrain the feelings of the audience. The exclamations, the insults addressed to Benedetto, who remained perfectly unconcerned, the energetic gestures, the movement of the gendarmes, the sneers of the scum of the crowd, always sure to rise to the surface in case of any disturbance. All this lasted 5 minutes, before the doorkeepers and magistrates were able to restore silence. In the midst of this tumult, the voice of the president was heard to exclaim, "Are you playing with justice, accused? And do you dare set your fellow citizens an example of disorder which even in these times has never been equaled?" Several persons hurried up to M. de Villefort, who sat half bowed over in his chair, offering him consolation, encouragement, and protestations of zeal and sympathy. Order was reestablished in the hall, except that a few people still moved about and whispered to one another. A lady, it was said, had just fainted. They had supplied her with a smelling bottle, and she had recovered during the scene of tumult. Andrea had turned his smiling face toward the assembly. Then, leaning with one hand on the oaken rail of the dock, in the most graceful attitude possible, he said, "Gentlemen, I assure you I had no idea of insulting the court or making a useless disturbance in the presence of this honorable assembly. They ask my age, I tell it. They ask where I was born, I answer. They ask my name. I cannot give it, since my parents abandoned me. But though I cannot give my own name, not possessing one, I can tell them my father's. Now I repeat, my father is named M. de Villefort, and I am ready to prove it. There was an energy, a conviction, and a sincerity in the manner of the young man, which silenced the tumult. All eyes were turned for a moment towards the procurer, who sat as motionless as though a thunderbolt had changed him into a corpse. "Gentlemen," said Andrea, commanding silence by his voice and manner, "I owe you the proofs and explanations of what I have said." "But," said the irritated president, "you called yourself Benedetto, declared yourself an orphan, and claimed Corsica as your country." "I said anything I please, in order that the solemn declaration I have just made should not be withheld, which otherwise would certainly have been the case. I now repeat that I was born at Auteuil on the night of the 27th of September, 1817, and that I am the son of Procureur M. de Villefort. Do you wish for any further details? I will give them. I was born in number 28, Rue de la Fontaine, in a room hung with red damask. My father took me in his arms, telling my mother I was dead, wrapped me in a napkin marked with an H and an N, and carried me into a garden where he buried me alive." A shudder ran through the assembly when they saw that the confidence of the prisoner increased in proportion to the terror of M. de Villefort. "But how have you become acquainted with all these details?" asked the president. "I will tell you, Mr. President. A man who had sworn vengeance against my father and had long watched his opportunity to kill him had introduced himself that night into the garden in which my father buried me. He was concealed in a thicket. He saw my father bury something in the ground and stab him. Then, thinking the deposit might contain some treasure, he turned up the ground and found me still living. The man carried me to the Foundling Asylum, where I was registered under the number 37. 3 months afterwards, a woman traveled from Rogliano to Paris to fetch me, and having claimed me as her son, carried me away. Thus, you see, though born in Paris, I was brought up in Corsica." There was a moment's silence, during which one could fancy the hall empty, so profound was the stillness. "Proceed," said the president. "Certainly, I might have lived happily amongst those good people who adored me, but my perverse disposition prevailed over the virtues which my adopted mother endeavored to instill into my heart. I increased in wickedness till I committed crime. One day, when I cursed Providence for making me so wicked and ordaining me to such a fate, my adopted father said to me, 'Do not blaspheme, unhappy child. The crime is that of your father, not yours, of your father, who consigned you to hell if you died, and the misery of a miracle preserved you alive.' After that I ceased to blaspheme, but I cursed my father. That is why I have uttered the words for which you blame me. That is why I have filled this whole assembly with horror. If I have committed an additional crime, punish me. But if you will allow that ever since the day of my birth my fate has been sad, bitter, and lamentable, then pity me." "But your mother?" asked the president. "My mother thought me dead. She is not guilty. I did not even wish to know her name, nor do I know it." Just then a piercing cry, ending in a sob, burst from the center of the crowd, who encircled the lady who had before fainted, and who now fell into a violent fit of hysterics. She was carried out of the hall. The thick veil which concealed her face dropped off, and Madame Danglars was recognized. Notwithstanding his shattered nerves, the ringing sensation in his ears, and the madness which turned his brain, Villefort rose as he perceived her. The proofs, said the president. "Remember, this tissue of horrors must be supported by the clearest proofs." "The proofs?" said Benedetto, laughing. "Do you want proofs?" "Yes." "Well, then, look at M. de Villefort, and then ask me for proofs." Everyone turned towards Procureur, who, unable to bear the universal gaze now riveted on him alone, advanced staggering into the midst of the tribunal, with his hair disheveled and his face indented with the mark of his nails. The whole assembly uttered a long murmur of astonishment. "Father," said Benedetto, "I am asked for proofs. Do you wish me to give them?" No, it is useless," stammered M. de Villefort in a hoarse voice. "No, it is useless." "How useless?" cried the president. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I feel it impossible to struggle against this deadly weight which crushes me. Gentlemen, I know I am in the hands of an avenging God. We need no proofs. Everything relating to this young man is true. A dull, gloomy silence, like that which precedes some awful phenomenon of nature, pervaded the assembly, who shuddered in dismay. What, M. de Villefort, cried the president. Do you yield to an hallucination? What? Are you no longer in possession of your senses? This strange, unexpected, terrible accusation has distorted your reason. Come, recover. The procurer dropped his head. His teeth chattered like those of a man under a violent attack of fever, and yet he was deadly pale. I am in possession of all my senses, sir, he said. My body alone suffers, as you may suppose. I acknowledge myself guilty of all the young man has brought against me, and from this hour hold myself under the authority of the procurer who will succeed me. And as he spoke these words with a hoarse, choking voice, he staggered towards the door, which was mechanically opened by a doorkeeper. The whole assembly were dumb with astonishment at the revelation and confession which had produced a catastrophe so different from that which had been expected during the last fortnight by the Parisian world. Well, said Beauchamp, let them now say that drama is unnatural. My foi, said Château, I would rather end my career like Anne de Morcerf. A pistol shot seems quite delightful compared with this catastrophe. And moreover, it kills, said Beauchamp. And to think that I had an idea of marrying his daughter, said Debray. She did well to die, poor girl. The sitting is adjourned, gentlemen, said the president. Fresh inquiries will be made, and the case will be tried next session by another magistrate. As for Andrea, who was calm and more interesting than ever, he left the hall, escorted by gendarmes, who involuntarily paid him some attention. Well, what do you think of this, my fine fellow? Asked Debray of the sergeant-at-arms, slipping a Louis into his hand. There will be extenuating circumstances, he replied. Chapter 111, Expiation. Notwithstanding the density of the crowd, M. de Villefort saw it open before him. There is something so awe-inspiring in great afflictions that even in the worst times the first emotion of a crowd has generally been to sympathize with the sufferer in a great catastrophe. Many people have been assassinated in a tumult, but even criminals have rarely been insulted during trial. Thus Villefort passed through the mass of spectators and officers of the Palais and withdrew, though he had acknowledged his guilt. He was protected by his grief. There are some situations which men understand by instinct, but which reason is powerless to explain. In such cases, the greatest poet is he who gives utterance to the most natural and vehement outburst of sorrow. Those who hear the bitter cry are as much impressed as if they listened to an entire poem, and when the sufferer is sincere, they are right in regarding his outburst as sublime. It would be difficult to describe the state of stupor in which Villefort left the Palais. Every pulse beat with feverish excitement. Every nerve was strained, every vein swollen, and every part of his body seemed to suffer distinctly from the rest, thus multiply his agony 1,000-fold. He made his way along the corridors through force of habit. He threw aside his magisterial robe, not out of deference to etiquette, but because it was an unbearable burden, a veritable garb of Nessus, insatiate in torture. Having staggered as far as the Rue Dauphine, he perceived his carriage, awoke his sleeping coachman by opening the door himself, threw himself on the cushions, and pointed toward the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. The carriage drove on. All the weight of his fallen fortune seemed suddenly to crush him. He could not foresee the consequences. He could not contemplate the future with the indifference of the hardened criminal who merely faces a contingency already familiar. God was still in his heart. God, he murmured, not knowing what he said. God! God! Behind the event that had overwhelmed him, he saw the hand of God. The carriage rolled rapidly onward. Villefort, while turning restlessly on the cushions, felt something press against him. He put out his hand to remove the object. It was a fan which Madame de Villefort had left in the carriage. This fan awakened a recollection which darted through his mind like lightning. He thought of his wife. "Oh!" he exclaimed, as though a red-hot iron were piercing his heart. During the last hour his own crime had alone been presented to his mind. Now another object, not less terrible, suddenly presented itself. His wife. He had just acted the inexorable judge with her. He had condemned her to death, and she, crushed by remorse, struck with terror, covered with a shame inspired by the eloquence of his irreproachable virtue, she, a poor weak woman, without help or the power of defending herself against his absolute and supreme will, she might at that very moment, perhaps, be preparing to die. An hour had elapsed since her condemnation. At that moment, doubtless, she was recalling all her crimes to her memory. She was asking pardon for her sins, Perhaps she was even writing a letter imploring forgiveness from her virtuous husband, forgiveness she was purchasing with her death. Villefort again groaned with anguish and despair. "Ah," he exclaimed, "that woman became criminal only from associating with me. I carried the infection of crime with me, and she has caught it as she would the typhus fever, the cholera, the plague, and yet I have punished her. I have dared to tell her, I have, repent and die. But no, she must not die. She shall live, and with me we will flee from Paris and go as far as the earth reaches." I told her the scaffold. Oh, heavens! I forgot that it awaits me also. How could I pronounce that word? Yes, we will fly. I will confess all to her. I will tell her daily that I also have committed a crime. Oh, what an alliance! The tiger and the serpent. Worthy wife of such as I am. She must live that my infamy may diminish hers. And Villefort dashed open the window in front of the carriage. "Faster, faster," he cried, in a tone which electrified the coachman. The horses, impelled by fear, flew towards the house. "Yes, yes," repeated Villefort, as he approached his home. "Yes, that woman must live. She must repent and educate my son, the sole survivor, with the exception of the indestructible old man, of the wreck of my house. She loves him. It was for his sake she has committed these crimes. We ought never to despair of softening the heart of a mother who loves her child. She will repent, and no one will know that she has been guilty. The events which have taken place in my house, though they now occupy the public mind, will be forgotten in time, or if, indeed, a few enemies should persist in remembering them, why then I will add them to my list of crimes. What will it signify if 1, 2, or 3 more are added? My wife and child shall escape from this gulf, carrying treasures with them. She will live and may yet be happy, since her child, in whom all her love is centered, will be with her. I shall have performed a good action, and my heart will be lighter, and the procureur breathed more freely than he had done for some time. The carriage stopped at the door of the house. Villefort leaped out of the carriage, and saw that his servants were surprised at his early return. He could read no other expression on their features. Neither of them spoke to him. They merely stood aside to let him pass by, as usual, nothing more. As he passed by M. Nordier's room, he perceived 2 figures through the half-open door, but he experienced no curiosity to know who was visiting his father. Anxiety carried him on further. "Come," he said, as he ascended the stairs leading to his wife's room. "Nothing has changed here." He then closed the door of the landing. "No one must disturb us," he said. "I must speak freely to her, accuse myself, and say—" He approached the door, touched the crystal handle, which yielded to his hand. "Not locked," he cried. "That is well." And he entered the little room in which Edward slept. For though the child went to school during the day, his mother could not allow him to be separated from her at night. With a single glance Villefort's eye ran through the room. "Not here," he said. "Doubtless she is in her bedroom." He rushed toward the door, found it bolted, and stopped, shuddering. "Heloise!" he cried. He fancied he heard the sound of a piece of furniture being removed. "Heloise!" he repeated. "Who is there?" Answered the voice of her he sought. He thought that voice more feeble than usual. "Open the door!" cried Villefort. "Open, it is I." But notwithstanding this request, notwithstanding the tone of anguish in which it was uttered, the door remained closed. Villefort burst it open with a violent blow. At the entrance of the room which led to her boudoir, Madame de Villefort was standing erect, pale, her features contracted, and her eyes glaring horribly. "Heloise, Heloise," he said. "What is the matter? Speak." The young woman extended her stiff white hands towards him. "It is done, monsieur," she said with a rattling noise which seemed to tear her throat. "What more do you want?" And she fell full length on the floor. Villefort ran to her and seized her hand, which convulsively clasped a crystal bottle with a golden stopper. Madame de Villefort was dead. Villefort, maddened with horror, stepped back to the threshold of the door, fixing his eyes on the corpse. "My son!" he exclaimed suddenly. "Where's my son? Edward, Edward!" And he rushed out of the room, still crying, "Edward, Edward!" The name was pronounced in such a tone of anguish that the servants ran up. "Where is my son?" asked Villefort. "Let him be removed from the house, that he may not see." "Master Edward is not downstairs, sir," replied the valet. "Then he must be playing in the garden. Go and see." "No, Sir, Madame de Villefort sent for him half an hour ago. He went into her room and has not been downstairs since. A cold perspiration burst out on Villefort's brow. His legs trembled, and his thoughts flew about madly in his brain like the wheels of a disordered watch. In Madame de Villefort's room? He murmured and slowly returned, with one hand wiping his forehead, and with the other supporting himself against the wall. To enter the room, he must again see the body of his unfortunate wife. To call Edward, he must reawaken the echo of that room which now appeared like a sepulchre. To speak seemed like violating the silence of tomb. His tongue was paralyzed in his mouth. "Edward," he stammered, "Edward." The child did not answer. Where then could he be if he had entered his mother's room and not since returned? He stepped forward. The corpse of Madame de Villefort was stretched across the doorway leading to the room in which Edward must be. Those glaring eyes seemed to watch over the threshold, and the lips bore the stamp of a terrible and mysterious irony. Through the open door was visible a portion of the boudoir, containing an upright piano and a blue satin couch. Villefort stepped forward 2 or 3 paces and beheld his child lying, no doubt asleep, on the sofa. The unhappy man uttered an exclamation of joy. A ray of light seemed to penetrate the abyss of despair and darkness. He had only to step over the corpse, enter the boudoir, take the child in his arms, and flee far, far away. Villefort was no longer a civilized man. He was a tiger hurt unto death, gnashing his teeth at his wound. He no longer feared realities, but phantoms. He leaped over the corpse as if it had been a burning brazier. He took the child in his arms, embraced him, shook him, called him, but the child made no response. He pressed his burning lips to the cheeks, but they were icy cold and pale. He felt the stiffened limbs. He pressed his hand upon the heart, but it no longer beat. The child was dead. A folded paper fell from Edward's breast. Villefort, thunderstruck, fell upon his knees. The child dropped from his arms and rolled on the floor by the side of its mother. He picked up the paper and, recognizing his wife's writing, ran his eyes rapidly over its contents. It ran as follows: "You know that I was a good mother. Since it was for my son's sake, I became criminal. A good mother cannot depart without her son." Villefort could not believe his eyes. He could not believe his reason. He dragged himself toward the child's body and examined it as a lioness contemplates its dead cub. Then a piercing cry escaped from his breast, and he cried, "Still the hand of God." The presence of the 2 victims alarmed him. He could not bear solitude shared only by 2 corpses. Until then he had been sustained by rage, by his strength of mind, by despair, by the supreme agony which led the Titans to scale the heavens and Ajax to defy the gods. He now arose, his head bowed beneath the weight of grief, and, shaking his damp, disheveled hair, he had never felt compassion for anyone determined to seek his father, that he might have someone to whom he could relate his misfortunes, someone by whose side he might weep. He descended the little staircase with which we are acquainted and entered Nordier's room. The old man appeared to be listening attentively and as affectionately as his infirmities would allow to the Abbé Busoni, who looked cold and calm, as usual. Villefort, perceiving the abbé, passed his hand across his brow. The past came to him like one of those waves whose wrath foams fiercer than the others. He recollected the call he had made upon him after the dinner at Château, and then the visit the abbé had himself paid to his house on the day of Valentine's death. "You here, sir," he exclaimed. "Do you then never appear but to act as an escort to death?" Busoni turned around, and, perceiving the excitement depicted on the magistrate's face, the savage luster of his eyes, he understood that the revelation had been made at the assizes. But beyond this he was ignorant. "I came to pray over the body of your daughter. And now why are you here? I come to tell you that you have sufficiently repaid your debt, and that from this moment I will pray to God to forgive you, as I do." "Good heavens!" exclaimed Villefort, stepping back fearfully. "Surely that is not the voice of the Abbé Busoni." "No." The abbé threw off his wig, shook his head, and his hair, no longer confined, fell in black masses around his manly face. "It is the face of the Count of Monte Cristo," exclaimed the procureur with a haggard expression. "You are not exactly right. Procureur, you must go farther back." That voice! Where did I first hear it?" "You heard it for the first time at Marseilles. 23 years ago, the day of your marriage with Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran. Refer to your papers." You are not Busoni. You are not Monte Cristo? Oh, heavens! You are, then, some secret, implacable, and mortal enemy. I must have wronged you in some way at Marseilles. Oh, woe to me! Yes, you are now on the right path, said the Count, crossing his arms over his broad chest. Search, search! But what have I done to you? Exclaimed Villefort, whose mind was balancing between reason and insanity, in that cloud which is neither a dream nor reality. What have I done to you? Tell me, then. Speak. You condemn me to a horrible, tedious death. You killed my father. You deprived me of liberty, of love, and happiness. Who are you, then? Who are you? I am the specter of a wretch you buried in the dungeons of the Château d'If. God gave that specter the form of the Count of Monte Cristo, when he at length issued from his tomb, enriched him with gold and diamonds, and led him to you. Ah, I recognize you, exclaimed the king's attorney. I am Edmond Dantès. You are Edmond Dantès, cried Villefort, seizing the Count by the wrist. Then come here. And up the stairs he dragged Monte Cristo, who, ignorant of what had happened, followed him in astonishment, foreseeing some new catastrophe. There, Edmond Dantès, he said, pointing to the bodies of his wife and child. See, are you well avenged? Monte Cristo became pale at this horrible sight. He felt that he had passed beyond the bounds of vengeance, and that he could no longer say, God is for and with me. With an expression of indescribable anguish, he threw himself upon the body of the child, reopened its eyes, felt its pulse, and then rushed with him into Valentine's room, of which he double-locked the door. My child, cried Villefort, he carries away the body of my child. Oh, curses, woe, death to you. He tried to follow Monte Cristo, but as though in a dream he was transfixed to the spot. His eyes glared as though they were starting through the sockets. He griped the flesh on his chest until his nails were stained with blood. The veins of his temples swelled and boiled as though they would burst their narrow boundary, and deluge his brain with living fire. This lasted several minutes, until the frightful overturn of reason was accomplished. Then, uttering a loud cry followed by a burst of laughter, he rushed down the stairs. A quarter of an hour afterwards the door of Valentine's room opened, and Monte Cristo reappeared. Pale, with a dull eye and heavy heart, all the noble features of that face, usually so calm and serene, were overcast by grief. In his arms he held the child, whom no skill had been able to recall to life. Bending on one knee, he placed it reverently by the side of its mother, with its head upon her breast. Then, rising, he went out, and meeting a servant on the stairs, he asked, "Where is M. de Villefort?" The servant, instead of answering, pointed to the garden. Monte Cristo ran down the steps, and advancing toward the spot designated beheld Villefort, encircled by his servants, with a spade in his hand, and digging the earth with fury. "It is not here," he cried. "It is not here." And then he moved farther on, and began again to dig. Monte Cristo approached him, and said in a low voice, with an expression almost humble, "Sir, you have indeed lost a son, but—" Villefort interrupted him. He had neither listened nor heard. "Oh, I will find it," he cried. "You may pretend he is not here, but I will find him, though I dig forever." Monte Cristo drew back in horror. "Oh," he said, "he is mad." And as though he feared that the walls of the accursed house would crumble around him, he rushed into the street, for the first time doubting whether he had the right to do as he had done. "Oh, enough of this, he cried. "Let me save the last." On entering his house, he met Morrel, who wandered about like a ghost awaiting the heavenly mandate for return to the tomb. "Prepare yourself, Maximilian," he said with a smile. "We leave Paris tomorrow." "Have you nothing more to do there?" asked Morrel. "No," replied Monte Cristo. "God grant I may not have done too much already." The next day they indeed left, accompanied only by Baptistin. Haydée had taken away Ali, and Bertuccio remained with Noirtier. Chapter 112. The Departure. The recent events formed the theme of conversation throughout all Paris. Emmanuel and his wife conversed with natural astonishment in their little apartment in the Rue Meslay upon the three successive, sudden, and most unexpected catastrophes of Morcerf, Danglars, and Villefort. Maximilian, who was paying them a visit, listened to their conversation, or rather was present at it, plunged in his accustomed state of apathy. "Indeed," said Julie, Might we not almost fancy, Emmanuel, that those people, so rich, so happy but yesterday, have forgotten in their prosperity that an evil genius, like the wicked fairies in Perrault's stories who present themselves unbidden at a wedding or a baptism, hovered over them, and appeared all at once to revenge himself for their fatal neglect? What a dire misfortune, said Emmanuel, thinking of Morcerf and Danglars. What dreadful sufferings, said Julie, remembering Valentine, but whom, with a delicacy natural to women, she did not name before her brother. If the Supreme Being has directed the fatal blow, said Emmanuel, it must be that he in his great goodness has perceived nothing in the past lives of these people to merit mitigation of their awful punishment. Do you not form a very rash judgment, Emmanuel? Said Julie. When my father, with a pistol in his hand, was once on the point of committing suicide, had anyone then said, "This man deserves his misery," would not that person have been deceived? Yes, but your father was not allowed to fall. A being was commissioned to arrest the fatal hand of death about to descend on him. Emmanuel had scarcely uttered these words when the sound of the bell was heard, the well-known signal given by the porter that a visitor had arrived. Nearly at the same instant the door was opened, and the Count of Monte Cristo appeared on the threshold. The young people uttered a cry of joy, while Maximilian raised his head, but let it fall again immediately. "Maximilian," said the Count, without appearing to notice the different impressions which his presence produced on the little circle, "I come to seek you." "To seek me?" repeated Morrel, as if awakening from a dream. "Yes," said Monte Cristo. "Has it not been agreed that I should take you with me? And did I not tell you yesterday prepare for departure?" "I am ready," said Maximilian. "I came expressly to wish them farewell." "Whither are you going, Count?" asked Julie. "In the first instance to Marseilles, madam." "To Marseilles!" exclaimed the young couple. "Yes, and I take your brother with me." "Oh, Count," said Julie, "will you restore him to us cured of his melancholy?" Morrel turned away to conceal the confusion of his countenance. "You perceive, then, that he is not happy?" said the Count. "Yes," replied the young woman, "and fear much that he finds our home but a dull one." "I will undertake to divert him," replied the Count. "I am ready to accompany you, sir," said Maximilian. "Adieu, my kind friends. Emmanuel, Julie, farewell." "How farewell?" exclaimed Julie. "Do you leave us thus, so suddenly, without any preparations for your journey, without even a passport?" "Needless delays but increase the grief of parting," said Monte Cristo. "And Maximilian has doubtless provided himself with everything requisite. At least, I advise him to do so." "I have a passport, and my clothes are ready packed," said Morrel in his tranquil but mournful manner. "Good," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "In these prompt arrangements we recognize the order of a well-disciplined soldier." "And you leave us," said Julie, "at a moment's warning? You do not give us a day, no, not even an hour before your departure?" "My carriage is at the door, madam, and I must be in Rome in 5 days." "But does Maximilian go to Rome?" exclaimed Emmanuel. "I am going wherever it may please the Count to take me," said Morrel, with a smile full of grief. "I am under his orders for the next month." "Oh, heavens! How strangely he expresses himself, Count," said Julie. "Maximilian goes with me," said the Count, in his kindest and most persuasive manner. "Therefore do not make yourself uneasy on your brother's account. Once more farewell, my dear sister. Emmanuel, adieu." Morrel repeated. "His carelessness and indifference touch me to heart," said Julie. "Oh, Maximilian, Maximilian, you are certainly concealing something from us." "Pshaw!" said Monte Cristo. "You will see him return to you gay, smiling and joyful." Maximilian cast a look of disdain, almost of anger, on the Count. "We must leave you," said Monte Cristo. "Before you quit us, Count," said Julie, "will you permit us to express to you all that the other day—" "Madam," interrupted the Count, taking her 2 hands in his, "all that you could say in words would never express what I read in your eyes. The thoughts of your heart are fully understood by mine. Like benefactors in romances, I should have left you without seeing you again, but that would have been a virtue beyond my strength, because I am a weak and vain man, fond of the tender, kind, and thankful glances of my fellow creatures. On the eve of departure, I carry my egotism so far as to say, 'Do not forget me, my kind friends. for probably you will never see me again." "Never see you again?" exclaimed Emmanuel, while two large tears rolled down Julie's cheeks. "Never behold you again? It is not a man, then, but some angel that leaves us, and this angel is on the point of returning to heaven after having appeared on earth to do good." "Say not so," quickly returned Monte Cristo. "Say not so, my friends. Angels never err. Celestial beings remain where they wish to be. Fate is not more powerful than they. It is they who, on the contrary, overcome fate. No, Emmanuel, I am but a man, and your admiration is as unmerited as your words are sacrilegious." And pressing his lips on the hand of Julie, who rushed into his arms, he extended his other hand to Emmanuel. Then, tearing himself from this abode of peace and happiness, he made a sign to Maximilian, who followed him passively, with the indifference which had been perceptible in him ever since the death of Valentine had so stunned him. "Restore my brother to peace and happiness," whispered Julie to Monte Cristo, and the Count pressed her hand in reply, as he had done 11 years before on the staircase leading to moral study. "You still confide, then, in Sinbad the Sailor?" asked he, smiling. "Oh, yes," was the ready answer. "Well, then, sleep in peace and put your trust in the Lord." As we have before said, the post-chaise was waiting, for powerful horses were already pawing the ground with impatience, while Ali, apparently just arrived from a long walk, was standing at the foot of the steps, his face bathed in perspiration. "Well," asked the Count in Arabic, "have you been to see the old man?" Ali made a sign in the affirmative. "And have you placed a letter before him, as I ordered you to do?" The slave respectfully signalized that he had. "And what did he say, or rather do?" Ali placed himself in the light, so that his master might see him distinctly, and then, imitating in his intelligent manner the countenance of the old man, he closed his eyes, as Noirtier was in the custom of doing when saying yes. "Good. He accepts," said Monte Cristo. "Now let us go." These words had scarcely escaped him, when the carriage was on its way, and the feet of the horses struck a shower of sparks from the pavement. Maximilian settled himself in his corner without uttering a word. Half an hour had passed when the carriage stopped suddenly. The Count had just pulled the silken check-string, which was fastened to Ali's finger. The Nubian immediately descended and opened the carriage door. It was a lovely starlight night. They had just reached the top of the hill village from whence Paris appears like a somber sea tossing its millions of phosphoric waves into light. Waves indeed more noisy, more passionate, more changeable, more furious, more greedy than those of tempestuous ocean. Waves which never rest as those of sea sometimes do. Waves ever dashing, ever foaming, ever engulfing what falls within their grasp. The Count stood alone, and at a sign from his hand, the carriage went on for a short distance. With folded arms, he gazed for some time upon the great city. When he had fixed his piercing look on this modern Babylon, which equally engages the contemplation of the religious enthusiast, the materialist, and the scoffer, "Great city," murmured he, inclining his head and joining his hands as if in prayer, "less than 6 months have elapsed since first I entered thy gates. I believe that the Spirit of God led my steps to thee, and that he also enables me to quit thee in triumph. The secret cause of my presence within thy walls I confided alone to him, who only has had the power to read my heart. God only knows that I retire from thee without pride or hatred, but not without many regrets. He only knows that the power confided to me has never been made subservient to my personal good or to any useless cause. Oh, great city, it is in thy palpitating bosom that I have found that which I sought. Like a patient miner, I have dug deep into thy very entrails to root out evil thence. Now my work is accomplished, my mission is terminated. Now thou canst neither afford me pain nor pleasure. Adieu, Paris, adieu." His look wandered over the vast plain like that of some genius of the night. He passed his hand over his brow, got into the carriage. The door was closed on him, and the vehicle quickly disappeared down the other side of the hill in a whirlwind of dust and noise. 10 leagues were passed, and not a single word was uttered. Moreau was dreaming, and Monte Cristo was looking at the dreamer. "Moreau," said the Count to him at length, "do you repent having followed me?" "No, Count, but to leave Paris. If I thought happiness might await you in Paris, Moreau, I would have left you there. Valentine reposes within the walls of Paris, and to leave Paris is like losing her a second time." "Maximilian," said the Count, The friends that we've lost do not repose in the bosom of the earth, but are buried deep in our hearts, and it has been thus ordained that we may always be accompanied by them. I have two friends, who in this way never depart from me, the one who gave me being, and the other who conferred knowledge and intelligence on me. Their spirits live in me. I consult them when doubtful, and if I ever do any good, it is due to their beneficent counsels. Listen to the voice of your heart, moral, and ask it whether you ought to preserve this melancholy exterior towards me. My friend, said Maximilian, the voice of my heart is very sorrowful, and promises me nothing but misfortune. It is the way of weakened minds to see everything through a black cloud. The soul forms its own horizons. Your soul is darkened, and consequently the sky of the future appears stormy and unpromising. That may possibly be true, said Maximilian, and he again subsided into his thoughtful mood. The journey was performed with that marvelous rapidity which the unlimited power of the Count ever commanded. Towns fled from them like shadows on their path, and trees shaken by the first winds of autumn seemed like giants madly rushing on to meet them, and retreating as rapidly when once reached. The following morning they arrived at Chalons, where the Count's steamboat waited for them. Without the loss of an instant, the carriage was placed on board, and the two travelers embarked without delay. The boat was built for speed. Her two paddle wheels were like two wings with which she skimmed the water like a bird. Moreau was not insensible to that sensation of delight which is generally experienced in passing rapidly through the air, and the wind, which occasionally raised a hair from his forehead, seemed on the point of dispelling momentarily the clouds collected there. As the distance increased between the travelers and Paris, almost superhuman serenity appeared to surround the Count. He might have been taken for an exile about to revisit his native land. Ere long, Marseilles presented herself to view. Marseilles, white, fervid, full of life and energy. Marseilles, the younger sister Tyre and Carthage, the successor to them in the empire of the Mediterranean. Marseilles, old, yet always young. Powerful memories were stirred within them by the sight of the round tower, Fort St. Nicholas, the city hall designed by Puget, the port with its brick quays, where they had both played in childhood, and it was with one accord that they stopped on the Cannebière. A vessel was setting sail for Algiers, on board of which the bustle usually attending departure prevailed. The passengers and their relations crowded on the deck, friends taking a tender but sorrowful leave of each other, some weeping, others noising their grief, the whole forming a spectacle that might be exciting even to those who witnessed similar sights daily, but which had no power to disturb the current of thought that had taken possession of the mind of Maximilian from the moment he had set foot on the broad pavement of the quay. "Here," said he, leaning heavily on the arm of Monte Cristo, "here's the spot where my father stopped when the Pharaoh entered the port. It was here that the good old man, whom you saved from death and dishonor, threw himself into my arms. I yet feel his warm tears on my face, and as were not the only tears shed, for many who witnessed our meeting wept also." Monte Cristo gently smiled and said, "I was there," at the same time pointing to the corner of a street. As he spoke, and in the very direction he indicated, a groan, expressive of bitter grief, was heard, and a woman was seen waving her hand to a passenger on board the vessel about to sail. Monte Cristo looked at her with an emotion that must have been remarked by Morrel, had not his eyes been fixed on the vessel. "Oh, heavens!" exclaimed Morrel. "I do not deceive myself. That young man who is waving his hat, that youth in the uniform of a lieutenant, is Albert de Morcerf." "Yes," said Monte Cristo, "I recognize him." "How so? You were looking the other way." The Count smiled, as he was in the habit of doing when he did not want to make any reply, and he again turned towards a veiled woman, who soon disappeared at the corner of the street. Turning to his friend, "Dear Maximilian," said the Count, "have you nothing to do in this land?" "I have to weep over the grave of my father," replied Morrel in a broken voice. "Well, then go. Wait for me there, and I will soon join you." "You leave me, then?" "Yes, I also have a pious visit to pay." Morrel allowed his hand to fall into that which the Count extended to him. Then, with an inexpressibly sorrowful inclination of the head, he quitted the Count and bent his steps to the east of the city. Monte Cristo remained on the same spot until Maximilian was out of sight. He then walked slowly towards Elis de Mailhan to seek out a small house with which our readers were made familiar at the beginning of this story. It yet stood, under the shade of a fine avenue of lime trees, which forms one of the most frequent walks of the idlers of Marseilles, covered by an immense vine, which spreads its aged and blackened branches over the stone front, burnt yellow by the ardent sun of the south. 2 stone steps worn away by the friction of many feet led to the door, which was made of 3 planks. The door had never been painted or varnished. So great cracks yawned in it during the dry season to close again when the rains came on. The house, with all its crumbling antiquity and apparent misery, was yet cheerful and picturesque, and was the same that old Dantès formerly inhabited, the only difference being that the old man occupied merely the garret, while the whole house was now placed at the command of Mercédès by the Count. The woman whom the Count had seen leave the ship with so much regret entered this house. She had scarcely closed the door after her when Monte Cristo appeared at the corner of a street, so that he found and lost her again almost at the same instant. The worn-out steps were old acquaintances of his. He knew better than anyone else how to open that weather-beaten door with a large-headed nail which served to raise the latch within. He entered without knocking or giving any other intimation of his presence, as if he had been a friend or the master of the place. At the end of a passage paved with bricks was a little garden, bathed in sunshine and rich in warmth and light. In this garden Mercédès had found, at the place indicated by the Count, the sum of money which he, through a sense of delicacy, had described as having been placed there 24 years previously. The trees of the garden were easily seen from the steps of the street door. Monte Cristo, on stepping into the house, heard a sigh that was almost a deep sob. He looked in the direction whence it came, and there under an arbor of Virginia jessamine, with its thick foliage and beautiful long purple flowers, he saw Mercédès seated, with her head bowed and weeping bitterly. She had raised her veil, and with her face hidden by her hands, was giving free scope to the sighs and tears which had been so long restrained by the presence of her son. Monte Cristo advanced a few steps, which were heard on the gravel. Mercédès raised her head and uttered a cry of terror on beholding a man before her. "Madam," said the Count, "it is no longer in my power to restore you to happiness, but I offer you consolation. Will you deign to accept it as coming from a friend?" "I am, indeed, most wretched," replied Mercédès. "Alone in the world, I had but my son, and he has left me." "He possesses a noble heart, madam," replied the Count, "and he has acted rightly. He feels that every man owes a tribute to his country. Some contribute their talents, others their industry. These devote their blood, those their nightly labors, to the same cause. Had he remained with you, his life must have become a hateful burden, nor would he have participated in your griefs. He will increase in strength and honor by struggling with adversity, which he will convert into prosperity. Leave him to build up the future for you, and I venture to say you will confide it to safe hands." "Oh," replied the wretched woman, mournfully shaking her head, "the prosperity of which you speak, and which, from the bottom of my heart, I pray God in his mercy to grant him, I can never enjoy. The bitter cup of adversity has been drained by me to the very dregs, and I feel that the grave is not far distant. You have acted kindly, Count, in bringing me back to the place where I have enjoyed so much bliss. I ought to meet death on the same spot where happiness was once all my own." "Alas," said Monte Cristo, "your words sear and embitter my heart, the more so as you have every reason to hate me. I have been the cause of all your misfortunes. But why do you pity instead of blaming me? You render me still more unhappy. Hate you, blame you, you Edmond, hate, reproach, the man that has spared my son's life. For was it not your fatal and sanguinary intention to destroy that son of whom Emma Morcerf was so proud? Oh, look at me closely and discover, if you can, even the semblance of reproach in me." The Count looked up and fixed his eyes on Mercédès, who arose partly from her seat and extended both her hands towards him. "Oh, look at me," continued she, with a feeling of profound melancholy. "My eyes no longer dazzled by their brilliancy, for the time is long fled since I used to smile on Edmond Dantès, who anxiously looked out for me from the window of yonder garret, then inhabited by his old father. Years of grief have created an abyss between those days and the present. I neither reproach you nor hate you, my friend. Oh, no, Edmond, it is myself that I blame, myself that I hate. Oh, miserable creature that I am!" cried she, clasping her hands and raising her eyes to heaven. I once possessed piety, innocence, and love, the three ingredients of the happiness of angels. And now what am I? Monte Cristo approached her and silently took her hand. "No," said she, withdrawing it gently. "No, my friend, touch me not. You have spared me. Yet of all those who have fallen under your vengeance, I was the most guilty. They were influenced by hatred, by avarice, and by self-love. But I was base, and for want of courage acted against my judgment. Nay, do not press my hand, Edmond. You are thinking, I am sure, of some kind speech to console me, but do not utter it to me. Reserve for others more worthy of your kindness. See," and she exposed her face completely to view. "See, misfortune has silvered my hair. My eyes have shed so many tears that they are encircled by a rim of purple, and my brow is wrinkled. You, Edmond, on the contrary, you're still young, handsome, dignified. It is because you have had faith, because you have had strength, because you had trust in God, and God has sustained you. But as for me, I have been a coward. I have denied God, and he has abandoned me." Mercedes burst into tears. Her woman's heart was breaking under its load of memories. Monte Cristo took her hand and imprinted a kiss on it. But she herself felt that it was a kiss of no greater warmth than he would have bestowed on the hand of some marble statue of a saint. "It often happens," continued she, "that a first fall destroys the prospect of a whole life. I believed you dead. Why did I survive you? What good has it done me to mourn for you eternally in the secret recesses of my heart? Only to make a woman of 39 look like a woman of 50. Why, having recognized you, and I the only one to do so, why was I able to save my son alone? Ought I not also to have rescued the man that I had accepted for a husband? Guilty though he were, yet I let him die. What do I say? Oh, merciful heavens! Was I not accessory to his death by my supine insensibility, by my contempt for him, not remembering or not willing to remember that it was for my sake he had become a traitor and a perjurer? In what am I benefited by accompanying my son so far, since I now abandon him and allow him to depart alone to the baneful climate of Africa? Oh, I have been base, cowardly, I tell you. I have abjured my affections, and like all renegades, I am of evil omen to those who surround me." "No, Mercedes," said Monte Cristo. "No, you judge yourself with too much severity. You are a noble-minded woman, and it was your grief that disarmed me. Still I was but an agent, led on by an invisible and offended deity, who chose not to withhold the fatal blow that I was destined to hurl. I take that God to witness, at whose feet I have prostrated myself daily for the last 10 years, that I would have sacrificed my life to you, and with my life the projects that were indissolubly linked with it. But, and I say it with some pride, Mercedes, God needed me and I lived. Examine the past and the present, and endeavor to dive into futurity, and then say whether I am not a divine instrument. The most dreadful misfortunes, the most frightful sufferings, the abandonment of all those who loved me, the persecution of those who did not know me, formed the trials of my youth, when suddenly, from captivity, solitude, misery, I was restored to light and liberty, and became the possessor of a fortune so brilliant, so unbounded, so unheard of, that I must have been blind not to be conscious that God had endowed me with it to work out his own great designs. From that time, I looked upon this fortune as something confided to me for a particular purpose. Not a thought was given to a life which you once, Mercedes, had the power to render blissful. Not 1 hour of peaceful calm was mine, but I felt myself driven on like an exterminating angel. Like adventurous captains about to embark on some enterprise full of danger, I laid in my provisions, I loaded my weapons, I collected every means of attack and defense. I inured my body to the most violent exercises, my soul to the bitterest trials. I taught my arm to slay, my eyes to behold excruciating sufferings, and my mouth to smile at the most horrid spectacles. Good-natured, confiding, and forgiving as I had been, I became revengeful, cunning and wicked, or rather, immovable as fate. Then I launched out into the path that was open to me. I overcame every obstacle and reached the goal, but woe to those who stood in my pathway. "Enough," said Mercedes. "Enough, Edmond. Believe me, that she who alone recognized you has been the only one to comprehend you, and had she crossed your path, and you had crushed her like glass, still, Edmond, still she must have admired you, like the gulf between me and the past. There is an abyss between you, Edmond and the rest of mankind. And I tell you freely that the comparison I draw between you and other men will ever be one of my greatest tortures. No, there is nothing in the world to resemble you in worth and goodness. But we must say farewell, Edmond, and let us part. Before I leave you, Mercedes, have you no request to make? Said the Count. I desire but one thing in this world, Edmond, the happiness of my son. Pray to the Almighty to spare his life, and I will take upon myself to promote his happiness. Thank you, Edmond. But have you no request to make for yourself, Mercedes? For myself, I want nothing. I live, as it were, between two graves. One is that of Edmond Dantès, lost to me long, long since. He had my love. That word becomes my faded lip now. But it is a memory dear to my heart, and one that I would not lose for all that the world contains. The other grave is that of the man who met his death in the hand of Edmond Dantès. I approve of the deed, but I must pray for the dead. Your son shall be happy, Mercedes, repeated the Count. Then I shall enjoy as much happiness as this world can possibly confer. But what are your intentions? Mercedes smiled sadly. To say that I shall live here, like the Mercedes of other times, gaining my bread by labor, would not be true, nor would you believe me. I have no longer the strength to do anything but to spend my days in prayer. However, I shall have no occasion to work, for the little sum of money buried by you, and which I found in the place you mentioned, will be sufficient to maintain me. Rumor will probably be busy respecting me, my occupations, my manner of living. That will signify but little. That concerns God, you, and myself. Mercedes, said the Count, I do not say it to blame you, but you made an unnecessary sacrifice in relinquishing the whole of the fortune amassed by M. de Morcerf. Half of it at least by right belonged to you, in virtue of your vigilance and economy. I perceive what you are intending to propose to me, but I cannot accept it. Edmond, my son, would not permit it. Nothing shall be done without the full approbation of Albert de Morcerf. I will make myself acquainted with his intentions, and will submit to them. But if he be willing to accept my offers, will you oppose them? You well know, Edmond, that I am no longer a reasoning creature. I have no will, unless it be the will never to decide. I have been so overwhelmed by the many storms that have broken over my head, that I am become passive in the hands of the Almighty, like a sparrow in the talons of an eagle. I live, because it is not ordained for me to die. If succor be sent to me, I will accept it. Ah, madam, said Monte Cristo, you should not talk thus. It is not so we should evince our resignation to the will of heaven. On the contrary, we are all free agents. Alas, exclaimed Mercedes, if it were so, if I possessed free will, but without the power to render that will efficacious, it would drive me to despair. Monte Cristo dropped his head and shrank from the vehemence of her grief. Will you not even say you will see me again? He asked. On the contrary, we shall meet again, said Mercedes, pointing to heaven with solemnity. I tell you, so to prove to you that I still hope. And after pressing her own trembling hand upon that account, Mercedes rushed up the stairs and disappeared. Monte Cristo slowly left the house and turned towards the quay. But Mercedes did not witness his departure, although she was seated at the little window of the room, which had been occupied by old Dantès. Her eyes were straining to see the ship which was carrying her son over the vast sea, but still her voice involuntarily murmured softly, Edmond, Edmond, Edmond.